The charity gala at Sterling Industries had been going on for 3 hours, and Rebecca was already tired of smiling. As one of the youngest billionaires in the tech world, she had learned to put on a perfect face for these events. But tonight felt different. Tonight felt worse. "Miss Sterling, may I have a word?" Another man in an expensive suit approached her. She could tell by his eager smile and the way his eyes lit up that he wasn't interested in talking about the charity they were supposed to be supporting. This was the fifth man tonight who had found some excuse to corner her. "Of course," Rebecca said, keeping her voice polite even though she wanted to walk away. She had been dealing with this her entire adult life. Men who saw dollar signs when they looked at her. Men who pretended to care about her thoughts and dreams but really just wanted access to her bank account. The man started talking about his amazing business idea that just needed a small investment of a few $1,000,000. Rebecca nodded and smiled, but inside she was counting the minutes until she could leave. She had built her company from nothing, working 18-hour days and sleeping on her office couch for 2 years. She had earned every penny through her own hard work and brilliant mind. Yet somehow people always saw her as just a walking wallet. "That sounds very interesting," she lied smoothly when the man finished his pitch. "Why don't you send me the details through my assistant?" It was her polite way of saying no, and thankfully he seemed to understand. As he walked away, Rebecca looked around the grand lobby of her building. The charity event had raised over $2 million for music, education, and schools, which made her happy. Music had always been her first love, even before computers and coding. She had started playing piano when she was 4 years old, and by the time she was 16, she could have had a career as a concert pianist if she wanted. But business had called to her louder than music. The thrill of building something, of solving problems that no one else could solve, had pulled her away from the piano bench and into the world of technology. Still, she kept a piano in her penthouse apartment and another one in her office. Playing helped her think through difficult problems. The beautiful black grand piano sitting in the corner of the lobby caught her eye. It had been donated by a music company for tonight's event, and it looked lonely sitting there while people walked past it without a second glance. Most of the guests were probably afraid to touch it, worried they would embarrass themselves. "Rebecca, darling." A woman's voice made her turn around. It was Helen, one of her mother's friends and a regular at these social events. Behind Helen stood another man, younger this time, with perfectly styled hair and a smile that looked practiced. In the mirror, "I want you to meet my nephew, Christopher," Helen said, pushing the young man forward. "He's a lawyer, very successful, and he plays tennis at the country club." Christopher stepped forward with confidence that bordered on arrogance. "I've heard so much about you, Rebecca. I was thinking maybe we could grab dinner sometime. I know this amazing place that costs $500 per person." Rebecca felt something snap inside her. $500 per person. He was already planning to spend her money before they had even shaken hands. She looked at his expensive watch, his designer suit, his perfect teeth that probably cost more than most people's cars. He was just like all the others. "Actually," Rebecca said, her voice getting louder, "I have a better idea." The conversations around them started to quiet down. People began turning to look at her. Good, she thought. Let them all hear this. "I'm so tired of meeting men who only care about my money," she announced to the growing crowd. "So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to give everyone here a challenge." The lobby was getting quieter now. Even the catering staff had stopped what they were doing to listen. Rebecca walked over to the grand piano and placed her hand on its smooth surface. "This is Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, she said clearly. "It's one of the most difficult pieces of classical music ever written. Most professional pianists struggle with it their entire careers." She looked around at the faces staring at her. Some looked confused, others amused. Christopher was starting to look uncomfortable. "Here's my challenge," Rebecca continued, her voice carrying across the lobby. "Anyone who can play this piece perfectly, and I mean absolutely perfectly, gets to take me on a date." A few people laughed nervously. Someone in the back whispered, "Is she serious?" "But wait," Rebecca said, holding up her hand. "There's more. If someone can play it so beautifully that it gives me goosebumps, if they can play it like a true master, She paused for dramatic effect. I'll marry them. Now the whole lobby erupted in surprised murmurs and laughter. Christopher's face had gone pale. Helen looked like she might faint. But Rebecca felt a rush of satisfaction. Let them laugh. Let them think she was crazy. At least now she would find out who was really interested in her and who just wanted her money. Come on then, she said, gesturing toward the piano. Who's brave enough to try? The crowd looked around at each other, but nobody moved. These people were used to showing off with expensive cars and designer clothes, not with actual talent or skill. Rebecca wasn't surprised. She had figured this would happen. What's wrong? She asked sweetly. No one knows how to play piano? That's strange considering how many of you told me about your sophisticated interests tonight. A few men in the crowd shifted uncomfortably. One of them, a guy who had bragged earlier about his expensive piano lessons, suddenly found his shoes very interesting to look at. Rebecca sat down at the piano bench and cracked her knuckles. Maybe I should show you what you're up against, she said. Her fingers found the keys and she began to play the opening notes of the concerto. The music filled the lobby like magic, every note perfect and full of emotion. She played for about 2 minutes, just enough to show everyone exactly how difficult the piece was, then stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was thick with awe and intimidation. Still think it's easy? She asked, standing up from the bench. Remember, it has to be perfect, not just good, not just pretty decent. Perfect. More silence. People started looking at their phones, checking the time, making excuses about why they needed to leave. Rebecca watched them with growing satisfaction. Finally, she was seeing their true colors. That quote S when she noticed him. In the corner of the lobby, almost hidden behind a cleaning cart, stood a man in a gray janitor's uniform. He was probably in his 30s, with tired eyes and hands that looked like they had seen years of hard work. He had stopped mopping the floor and was staring at the piano with an expression she couldn't quite read. Don't worry about cleaning around here right now, Rebecca called out to him. We'll be done soon, and then you can finish your work. The janitor looked at her for a moment, then back at the piano. Something flickered across his face. Was it longing? Sadness? She couldn't tell. But instead of moving away like she expected, he took a step closer to the piano. The remaining guests were starting to leave now, making polite excuses about early morning meetings and previous commitments. Rebecca wasn't surprised. She had basically called them all out for being shallow and fake, and they didn't like being exposed. Well, Christopher said, straightening his tie, this has been interesting, but I really should be going. Of course you should, Rebecca said dryly. Wouldn't want to risk actually having to prove you're worth dating. As the crowd thinned out, Rebecca felt both victorious and slightly empty. She had made her point, but she was still alone. Still surrounded by people who saw her as a prize to be won rather than a person to be loved. That quote S when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned around, expecting to see Helen or one of the other lingering guests. Instead, she found herself face to face with the janitor. Up close, she could see that despite his tired appearance, his eyes were intelligent and kind. Excuse me, miss, he said quietly. His voice had a slight accent that she couldn't place. That piece you played, it was beautiful. Rebecca blinked in surprise. Of all the people to compliment her playing, she hadn't expected it to be the cleaning man. Thank you, she said, not sure what else to say. The janitor looked past her at the piano, and that strange expression crossed his face again. I haven't heard it played in a long time, he said softly, almost to himself. There was something in his voice that made Rebecca look at him more carefully, something that suggested there was more to this man than met the eye. Do you know much about classical music? She asked. The janitor was quiet for a moment, still staring at the piano. Then he looked back at her, and she saw something in his eyes that looked like pain mixed with hope. A little, he said simply. And that's when Rebecca realized that her Evening might not be over after all. Rebecca watched as the janitor stood there, looking at the piano like it was an old friend he hadn't seen in years. The lobby had mostly emptied out now, with just a few catering staff cleaning up glasses and plates in the background. The silence felt heavy, like the air before a thunderstorm. "You can go ahead and finish your cleaning," Rebecca said, though something in her voice sounded less certain than before. "I know you probably have other floors to take care of." The janitor nodded slowly, but he didn't move toward his cleaning cart. Instead, he took another step closer to the piano. Rebecca found herself watching him more carefully. There was something different about the way he moved, the way he held himself when he looked at the instrument. "This is a beautiful piano," he said quietly, running his eyes over its polished surface. "Steinway Model D Concert Grand. These are the ones they use at Carnegie Hall." Rebecca's eyebrows shot up. She hadn't expected him to know anything about piano brands, let alone recognize a concert-quality instrument on sight. Most people couldn't tell the difference between a $20,000 piano and a $200,000 one. "You know about pianos?" she asked, curious now. The janitor's smile was sad. "I used to know a lot about them." Something in his voice made Rebecca's heart skip a beat. There was a story there, hidden behind those tired eyes. Before she could ask more questions, he surprised her by walking directly to the piano bench. "Sir?" "Wait," Rebecca said, suddenly feeling protective of the expensive instrument. "This is a very complicated piece of music. It's not something you can just—" But her words trailed off as she watched him sit down at the bench. He adjusted the height with the practiced ease of someone who had done it 1,000 times before. Then he placed his hands above the keys, and Rebecca saw something that made her breath catch in her throat. His hands were rough and calloused from years of cleaning work, but the way he held them over the keyboard was pure elegance. His fingers curved naturally, his wrists relaxed, his shoulders positioned perfectly. This wasn't the posture of someone who had taken a few piano lessons as a child. This was the posture of a trained musician. "You don't understand," Rebecca said, her voice weaker now. "This piece, it takes years to learn properly. Even professional pianists struggle with it. The technical requirements alone." The janitor looked up at her, and for the first time that evening, she saw him really smile. It transformed his entire face, making him look younger and somehow familiar, like she had seen him somewhere before. "I know," he said simply. "I've played it many times." Before Rebecca could process what he had just said, his fingers touched the keys. The first notes of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto. Number 2 filled the lobby, and Rebecca felt like the world had suddenly shifted on its axis. This wasn't the tentative playing of an amateur. This wasn't even the competent performance of a good pianist. This was something else entirely. The melody flowed from his fingers like water, each note perfectly placed, perfectly timed. But more than that, there was emotion in every phrase. Rebecca could hear longing in the gentle passages, power in the dramatic sections, and something that sounded like heartbreak woven through it all. She found herself sinking into a nearby chair, her legs suddenly too weak to hold her up. The few remaining people in the lobby had stopped what they were doing and were staring at the man at the piano with their mouths open. Even the catering staff had put down their trays and were listening in amazement. As the music continued, Rebecca began to notice things that only someone with her level of musical training would catch. His technique was flawless, not just good, but world-class. The way he handled the rapid passages in the second movement showed years of professional training. The emotional depth he brought to the slower sections spoke of someone who had lived with this music, who understood it from the inside out. But there was something else, something that made tears start to form in Rebecca's eyes. There was pain in his playing, beautiful, heart-wrenching pain that spoke of loss and regret and dreams that had been put away. She could hear it in every note, and it made her chest ache with sympathy for this man she barely knew. The janitor's uniform seemed to disappear as he played. In its place, Rebecca could see the musician he truly was. His whole body moved with the music, his face showing every emotion the composer had written into the score. This wasn't just someone playing notes on a page. This was an artist telling a story with his soul. When he reached the famous climax of the first movement, his playing became so powerful that Rebecca could feel it in her bones. The piano sang under his hands, producing sounds she had never heard from the instrument before. She had played this same piece hundreds of times, but she had never made it sound like this. Nobody she had ever heard had made it sound like this. As the piece continued, Rebecca found herself forgetting everything else. She forgot about the charity gala, forgot about the men who had tried to impress her with their money, forgot about her frustrations and her challenges. All that existed was the music and the mystery of the man creating it. The other people in the lobby seemed equally mesmerized. Rebecca could see the catering staff standing frozen, holding empty glasses and forgotten plates. Even the security guard by the door had stopped his patrol and was listening with wonder on his face. When the janitor reached the gentle, introspective section in the middle of the piece, Rebecca felt like he was speaking directly to her. The music seemed to say things that words couldn't express, about loneliness, about searching for something that felt lost, about the courage it takes to hope when life has knocked you down. She realized she was crying and didn't care. This was the most beautiful thing she had heard in years, maybe in her entire life, and it was coming from a man she had dismissed without a second thought, someone she walked past every night without even saying hello. As he moved into the final movement, the janitor's playing became even more intense. Rebecca could see sweat on his forehead despite the cool air in the lobby. His entire being was focused on the music, pouring everything he had into every note. It was like watching someone pray with their hands. The technical demands of the final section were enormous. Rapid scales, impossible jumps between keys, coordination that would challenge even the best pianists in the world. But he played it, all with an ease that took Rebecca's breath away. More than that, he played it with a musicality that she had only heard from the greatest masters. When he reached the thunderous final chords, the entire lobby seemed to shake with the power of the music. Rebecca felt like her heart was going to burst from the intensity of it all. The last notes rang through the air, echoing off the marble walls and high ceiling, creating a moment of perfect, overwhelming beauty. Then, silence. The janitor sat at the bench, his hands still on the keys, his chest rising and falling as he caught his breath. Nobody in the lobby moved. Nobody spoke. The silence stretched on, filled with awe and disbelief and something that felt almost sacred. Finally, Rebecca managed to find her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "Who are you?" The janitor slowly lifted his hands from the keyboard and turned to look at her. The transformation was remarkable. One moment he had been a master musician commanding a concert grand piano, and now he was just a tired man in a gray uniform again. But Rebecca would never see him the same way. She couldn't unsee what she had just witnessed. She couldn't unhear the most beautiful performance of her life coming from someone she had never really looked at before. "My name is David," he said quietly, "and I used to be a pianist." Rebecca stared at him, her mind racing with 1,000 questions. Used to be? How could someone with that level of talent be working as a janitor? What had happened to him? Why was he here cleaning floors instead of playing in concert halls around the world? But before she could ask any of these questions, David stood up from the piano bench and straightened his uniform. "I should get back to work now," he said, his voice returning to the quiet, respectful tone she had heard from him before. "Wait," Rebecca said, standing up quickly. "David, wait. That was incredible. That was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard." David paused, and she saw a flicker of something cross his face. Pride, maybe, or gratitude. But then, it was gone, replaced by something that looked like sadness. "Thank you," he said simply. It felt good to play again, and with that, he walked back toward his cleaning cart, leaving Rebecca standing by the piano with her world completely turned upside down. Rebecca stood frozen by the piano, watching David push his cleaning cart toward the elevator. Her heart was still racing from what she had just witnessed. The sound of his playing was still echoing in her ears, and she couldn't let him just walk away like nothing had happened. "David, please wait," she called out, her voice stronger this time. He stopped but didn't turn around right away. She could see his shoulders tense up like he was preparing himself for something difficult. "I can't just pretend I didn't hear what I just heard," Rebecca continued, walking toward him. "That wasn't just good playing. That was professional level. Better than professional level." David slowly turned around to face her. Up close, she could see exhaustion in his eyes, but also something else. A deep sadness that seemed to go all the way to his soul. "It was a long time ago," he said quietly. "How long?" Rebecca asked. "And please don't tell me it doesn't matter. Someone doesn't play like that by accident." The few remaining people in the lobby were still staring at them. Rebecca realized this conversation needed to be private. She gestured toward a seating area in the corner away from the curious eyes. "Could we sit down for a minute? I promise I'm not trying to make this weird. I need to understand." David hesitated, then nodded. They walked over to two leather chairs near the floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out onto the city. David perched on the edge of his seat, like he might need to run away at any moment. "I'm sorry if I embarrassed you," he said. "I shouldn't have played. When I heard you playing earlier, it reminded me of things I've been trying to forget." Rebecca shook her head. "You didn't embarrass me. You amazed me. David, I've been playing piano since I was 4 years old. I've heard some of the best pianists in the world. What you just did, I've never heard anything like it." David looked down at his hands, those same hands that had just created magic on the piano keys. "I used to perform," he said, so quietly she had to lean forward to hear him. "A long time ago." "Where?" Rebecca asked gently. "Concert halls? Orchestras?" "Both," David said. "I was the principal pianist with the Mexico City Philharmonic for 8 years. Before that, I played solo concerts in Europe and South America. I had recording contracts, tour schedules, everything a classical musician dreams of." Rebecca felt like someone had just told her that her janitor was actually a famous movie star. "Mexico City Philharmonic? David, that's one of the most prestigious orchestras in Latin America. I saw them perform when I was in college. They were incredible." A small, sad smile crossed David's face. "We had some good years, some really good years." "What happened?" Rebecca asked. Though she could tell from his expression that this was the hard part of the story, David was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the city lights. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. 5 years ago, my wife and daughter were killed in a car accident." Rebecca felt like all the air had been sucked out of her lungs. "Oh God, David, I'm so sorry." "It was raining," David continued, still looking out the window. "Maria was picking up our daughter Elena from her piano lesson. Elena was only 7, but she was already showing real talent. She wanted to be like her papa." Tears were starting to form in Rebecca's eyes, but she didn't say anything. She could tell he needed to get this out. "A drunk driver ran a red light," David said. "They died instantly. The doctor said they didn't suffer, but that didn't make it hurt any less." "David?" "I couldn't play anymore after that," he said, finally looking at her. "Every time I sat at a piano, all I could hear was Elena practicing her scales in the next room. All I could see was Maria sitting in the front row at my concerts, proud and beautiful and alive." Rebecca understood now. The pain she had heard in his playing, the heartbreak woven through every note. It all made sense. "I lost everything," David continued. "I couldn't perform, so I couldn't pay my bills. I lost my apartment, my car, everything. I started drinking too much, stopped taking care of myself. The orchestra tried to help, gave me time off, but I couldn't come back. I couldn't even touch a piano without falling apart." "So you came here?" "I came to the United States thinking maybe a fresh start would help. But I couldn't speak much English and my only skills were music. Who's going to hire a broken-down pianist who can't even play anymore?" David shrugged. Cleaning jobs don't require references from your previous life. Rebecca felt her heart breaking for this man. To have so much talent, so much beauty to offer the world, and to be trapped by grief and circumstances, it seemed impossibly cruel. How long have you been working here? She asked. 3 years, David said. I clean this building every night. I've walked past your office hundreds of times. You work late a lot. Rebecca realized with a start that he was right. She did work late most nights, and she had probably walked past him dozens of times without really seeing him. The thought made her feel ashamed. I've seen you play sometimes, David added. Through your office window. You have a piano in there, and sometimes when you're thinking through problems, you play. You're very good. Not like you, Rebecca said. Different, David corrected her. You play like someone who loves music but chose a different path. I used to play like someone who had no other choice. Tonight I played like someone who finally remembered why he fell in love with music in the first place. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both lost in their own thoughts. Rebecca was trying to process everything she had learned. This wasn't just a random janitor who happened to know how to play piano. This was a world-class musician who had lost everything and was slowly trying to rebuild his life. David, she said finally, what you did tonight, taking that challenge, playing that piece, and that took incredible courage. David shook his head. It was stupid. I shouldn't have done it. Now you know, and tomorrow everyone will know, and I'll probably lose my job for making a scene. Are you crazy? Rebecca said, more forcefully than she meant to. You're not going to lose your job, if anything. She paused, an idea forming in her mind. David, when was the last time you played for an audience? Really played, not just for yourself? The night before the accident, David said immediately. We were doing Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. Maria and Elena were in the audience. It was Elena's first time hearing me play with the full orchestra. And you haven't performed since then? I couldn't. Every time I tried, I would start crying and have to stop. Tonight was the first time I've played a complete piece in 5 years. Rebecca leaned forward in her chair. David, I heard something in your playing tonight that I've never heard before. It wasn't just technical skill, though that was incredible. It was something deeper. It was like you were telling a story about love and loss and hope all at the same time. Music was always how I talked to Maria, David said softly. Even when we were dating, if I couldn't find the words to tell her how I felt, I would play something for her. She always understood. Do you think, Rebecca said carefully, that maybe tonight you were playing for her again? David's eyes filled with tears, but he nodded. Maybe I was. And maybe she would want me to keep playing. Rebecca felt a warmth spreading through her chest. This wasn't just about her silly challenge anymore. This was about a man finding his way back to himself, back to the thing that made him who he was. There's something I need to tell you, she said. Earlier tonight I made that announcement because I was frustrated with men who only saw me as a bank account. I never expected anyone to actually take the challenge seriously. I know, David said. That's why I played. Not because I wanted to marry you, no offense, but because the music called to me. For the first time in 5 years, I heard a piece I loved, and I wanted to play it more than I was afraid of the pain. Rebecca smiled. No offense taken. But, David, you did meet the challenge. You played it perfectly, more than perfectly. What are you saying? I'm saying that technically, according to my very public announcement, I owe you a date. David looked panicked. Rebecca, you don't understand. I'm just a janitor. You're a billionaire. People would think what? Rebecca asked. That I care more about talent and character than money? That I can recognize something real when I see it? Let them think that. David shook his head. It wouldn't work. We're from completely different worlds. Are we? Rebecca asked. We're both musicians who chose different paths. We both know what it feels like to love something so much it hurts. We both understand that the most important things in life can't be bought. David looked at her for a long moment, and Rebecca could see him struggling with himself. Finally, he spoke. "I don't know if I'm ready for anything complicated," he said honestly. "I'm still learning how to live with my grief. Some days are harder than others." "Then let's start simple," Rebecca said. "Coffee. Tomorrow afternoon. Just two musicians talking about music and life. No pressure, no expectations. Just seeing what happens." David was quiet for a moment, then slowly nodded. "I think I'd like that," he said. As they stood up to leave, Rebecca realized that this was the first time in years that she was looking forward to spending time with someone just to get to know them better. Not because they wanted something from her, not because she wanted something from them, but because she had found someone who understood the language her heart spoke. "David," she said, as they walked toward the elevator. "Thank you for tonight, for the music, for the honesty, for reminding me that the most beautiful things in life usually come from the most unexpected places." David smiled, and this time it reached his eyes. "Thank you for listening," he said, "and for seeing me." As the elevator doors closed between them, Rebecca realized that her life had just changed in ways she couldn't even begin to understand. Yet Rebecca woke up the next morning to her phone buzzing nonstop. At first, she thought it might be David calling about their coffee date, but when she picked up the phone, her stomach dropped. 17 missed calls from her mother, 12 from her assistant, and 43 text messages from friends and business associates. The first text message made everything clear. "Rebecca, please tell me this video isn't real." "Video? What video?" Rebecca sat up in bed and quickly searched her name online. The first result made her heart sink. Someone at last night's gala had recorded the entire piano challenge on their phone. The video was everywhere: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. The title read, "Billionaire's Marriage Challenge Accepted by Janitor. You Won't Believe What Happens Next." The video had already been viewed over 2 million times, and it was growing by the minute. Rebecca watched in horror as she saw herself making the announcement, then David walking to the piano, then his incredible performance. The person recording had even caught her crying during the music. The comment section was a nightmare. Some people were calling it the most beautiful thing they'd ever seen. Others were calling it a publicity stunt. Many were making cruel jokes about David's appearance and his job. Rebecca felt sick reading them. Her phone rang. It was her mother, Rebecca Ann Sterling. Her mother's voice was ice cold through the phone. "What on earth were you thinking last night?" "Mom, I can explain." "Explain? The entire world is talking about my daughter promising to marry the janitor. Do you have any idea what this is doing to our family's reputation?" Rebecca got out of bed and walked to her kitchen, trying to stay calm. "Mom, his name is David, and he's an incredibly talented musician. If you had heard him play—" "I don't care if he's Mozart himself," her mother snapped. "He cleans toilets for a living, Rebecca. What will people think? What will the board of directors think? What will your investors think?" Before Rebecca could answer, her mother continued, "I'm calling an emergency family meeting for this afternoon. Your father is flying back from Dubai early. We need to do damage control before this gets any worse." The line went dead. Rebecca stared at her phone, feeling a familiar tightness in her chest. This was exactly what she had feared might happen, but seeing it play out was worse than she had imagined. Her assistant called next. "Rebecca, I've been fielding calls all morning. CNN wants an interview. The Wall Street Journal is writing a story, and your 2 o'clock board meeting has been moved up to 10 a.m. They want to discuss the situation." "What situation?" Rebecca asked, though she already knew the answer. "The video, Rebecca. Everyone's talking about it. Some of the board members are concerned about how this might affect the company's image." After hanging up, Rebecca tried to focus on getting ready for what was clearly going to be a very long day. But every time she looked at her phone, there were more notifications. The story was spreading faster than she had ever imagined possible. By the time she arrived at her office, there were news vans parked outside the building. Reporters with cameras were trying to get interviews with anyone coming or going. Rebecca had to sneak in through the parking garage to avoid them. The board meeting was even worse than she had expected. 12 middle-aged men and women in expensive suits all looking at her like she had lost her mind. "Rebecca," said Robert, the chairman of the board, "we need to talk about this video situation." "What about it?" Rebecca asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Well, for starters, you promised to marry someone on camera, someone who works as a janitor in this very building. Do you understand how this looks to our shareholders, to our business partners? It looks like I'm a person who keeps her word," Rebecca said. Margaret, the oldest board member, shook her head. "Rebecca, dear, be realistic. You're a young woman who built a billion-dollar company. You're supposed to be a role model for female entrepreneurs. Dating the cleaning staff sends the wrong message." "What message is that exactly?" Rebecca asked, feeling her temper rising. "That you're not serious," said another board member. "That you make impulsive decisions. That you don't understand your position in society." "My position in society?" Rebecca stood up. "My position in society is what I make it. I built this company with my own 2 hands. I didn't inherit it. I didn't marry into it, I earned it. And I'll date whoever I want to date." "Rebecca," Robert said more gently, "we're not trying to control your personal life. But you have to understand, you're not just Rebecca anymore. You're the face of Sterling Industries. Your actions affect stock prices, investor confidence, employee morale. So you're saying I should care more about stock prices than my own happiness?" "We're saying you should think about the bigger picture," Margaret said. "This man, David, he seems nice enough. But what do you really know about him? What if he's just after your money? What if this whole thing was planned?" Rebecca felt like screaming. "He didn't know about my challenge beforehand. He was just doing his job when I made the announcement." "How do you know that for sure?" asked another board member. "Rebecca, you're brilliant when it comes to business, but you might be naive when it comes to people who might want to take advantage of you." The meeting went on for 2 hours. By the end, Rebecca felt exhausted and frustrated. The board didn't officially forbid her from seeing David, but they made it very clear they thought it was a terrible idea. When she finally got back to her office, she found David waiting by her door. He looked uncomfortable and worried, still wearing his janitor's uniform. "Rebecca," he said when he saw her, "we need to talk." They went into her office and closed the door. David immediately walked to the window and looked down at the news vans in the street. "This is exactly what I was afraid of," he said. "I've been getting calls all morning. Reporters found out where I live. My neighbors are talking to anyone with a camera." "David, I'm so sorry. I had no idea someone was recording last night." "It's not your fault," David said, but his voice sounded tired. "I saw some of the comments on the video. People are saying terrible things about both of us." Rebecca had seen the comments too. People calling David a gold digger, saying he was too old for her, making fun of his accent and his appearance. Others were saying Rebecca was having a mental breakdown or that this was all a publicity stunt for her company. "There's more," David said quietly. "My supervisor called me this morning. The building management company is getting pressure to fire me. They think having me here is causing too much disruption." Rebecca felt anger rising in her chest. "They can't fire you for playing piano. They can fire me for any reason they want," David said. "I'm just a janitor, Rebecca. I don't have the same protections you do." Rebecca walked over to her desk and picked up her phone. "I'm calling the management company right now." "No," David said firmly. "Don't do that." "Why not?" "Because it will just make things worse. If people think you're using your influence to protect me, it will confirm what they're already saying. That this is all fake, that I'm using you." Rebecca put down her phone, frustrated. "So what are we supposed to do? Just let them ruin both our lives?" David sat down in the chair across from her desk. "Maybe we should call off that coffee date. Maybe we should pretend last night never happened." "Is that what you want?" Rebecca asked. David was quiet for a long moment. "No," he said finally, "but I don't want to destroy your life either. You've worked too hard to build what you have. And what about what you've worked for? Rebecca asked. David, last night when you played, that was the first time I've seen you really alive since I've known you. Are you going to let other people's opinions take that away from you again? It's different now, David said. When I lost Maria and Elena, that was private grief. This is public humiliation. Everyone in the world is watching and judging. Rebecca's phone rang. It was her mother again. Don't answer it, David said. Let me guess. Family emergency meeting? Rebecca nodded. How did you know? Because I've been poor most of my life, and I know how rich families react when their children associate with people like me. People like you? You mean incredibly talented, kind, honest people? I mean poor people, Rebecca. People without the right education, the right connections, the right background. Rebecca felt her heart breaking. In just one day, she could see David retreating back into himself, back into the shell he had been hiding in for 5 years. My family wants me to stay away from you, she said honestly. My board of directors thinks you're after my money. The media is having a field day with both of us, so we're both getting pressure to end this before it starts, David said. Yes. They sat in silence for a minute, both lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Rebecca spoke up. David, can I ask you something? Of course. When you played last night, what did it feel like? David's expression softened. Like coming home after being lost for years, like remembering who I used to be before the pain took over. And do you want to feel that way again? More than anything. Then we're not giving up, Rebecca said firmly. I don't care what my family says. I don't care what the board thinks. And I definitely don't care what strangers on the internet think. You deserve to have music in your life again. And I deserve to spend time with someone who sees me as more than just a bank account. David looked at her with something that might have been hope. It's going to be hard, Rebecca. People are going to say awful things. They're going to try to tear us both down. Let them try, Rebecca said. I've been dealing with people who underestimate me my whole life, and you've survived losing everything that mattered to you and still found the strength to create something beautiful. If we can handle those things separately, maybe we can handle this together. David stood up and walked back to the window. Down on the street, Rebecca could see more news vans arriving. Okay, he said finally. But we do this right. No hiding, no pretending, no letting people think this is something it's not. What is it then? Rebecca asked. David turned back to her and smiled, the first real smile she had seen from him all day. It's two people who understand each other, trying to see if they can build something good together despite what everyone else thinks. Rebecca smiled back. I can live with that. As David left her office to go back to work, Rebecca realized that the hardest part wasn't behind them. It was just beginning. But for the first time in her life, she was facing a challenge that felt worth fighting for. 6 months had passed since that night at the charity gala, and Rebecca could hardly believe how much had changed. She sat in the front row of the city's concert hall, wearing a simple blue dress instead of her usual business suit. Tonight was different from any other night in her life. The media storm had been brutal at first. For weeks, photographers followed them everywhere. Reporters dug into David's past, trying to find some scandal or proof that he was using Rebecca for her money. They found nothing because there was nothing to find. Just a man who had lost everything and was slowly learning to hope again. Rebecca's family had been the hardest challenge. Her mother had threatened to cut her out of the will. Her father had flown back from Dubai just to tell her she was making the biggest mistake of her life. Even her younger brother, who usually stayed out of family drama, had called to ask if she was having some kind of breakdown. But something unexpected had happened during their first coffee date. Rebecca had watched David talk about music, about his memories of performing, about the way he missed the feeling of connecting with an audience through a shared piece of art. And she realized she was falling for him, not because of his talent, not because of the romantic story, but because of who he was as a person. David was kind in a way that couldn't be faked. He listened when she talked about the loneliness of being successful so young. He understood what it felt like to love something so much it hurt. and he never once asked her for money or favors or anything except her time and attention. The relationship hadn't been easy. There were moments when the pressure almost broke them. David had nightmares sometimes, waking up calling for Maria and Elena. Rebecca had panic attacks when business deals fell through because partners didn't want to work with someone who was dating the help, but they had worked through it together. Rebecca had convinced David to start playing piano again just for himself at first. She bought him a beautiful, upright piano for his small apartment. Some nights, she would sit and listen to him play, and she could see pieces of his old self coming back to life. David had helped Rebecca in ways she never expected. He taught her how to find joy in small things: a perfect cup of coffee, a sunset viewed from his apartment's fire escape, the satisfaction of a day's work well done regardless of how much money it made. He showed her that success meant nothing if you didn't have someone to share it with. 3 months ago, Rebecca had made a decision that shocked everyone, including herself. She had approached the city's symphony orchestra with a proposal. Sterling Industries would sponsor a special concert featuring David as the soloist. The orchestra's music director had been skeptical until he heard David play. Then he immediately agreed. Planning the concert had been incredible. Watching David work with the orchestra, seeing him come alive during rehearsals, witnessing his confidence return piece by piece. It was like watching someone learn to breathe again after holding their breath for years. Tonight was the night of the concert. David would be performing Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 with the full orchestra, the same piece that had brought them together. Ladies and gentlemen, the conductor stepped up to the microphone on stage. Tonight we have the privilege of presenting a very special performance. Our soloist this evening is a musician who reminds us that talent has no boundaries, that art can be found in the most unexpected places, and that it's never too late for a second chance. The audience applauded as David walked onto the stage. He looked completely different from the tired man in the janitor's uniform who had surprised everyone 6 months ago. Tonight he wore a perfectly fitted black tuxedo, his hair neatly styled, his posture confident and proud. But more than his appearance, it was the light in his eyes that showed how much he had changed. Rebecca felt tears starting to form as she watched him sit at the concert grand piano and adjust the bench. In the past 6 months, she had watched him transform from a broken man hiding from his pain into someone who had learned to carry his grief without letting it destroy him. The conductor raised his baton, and the orchestra began the opening notes. When David's entrance came, Rebecca held her breath. The first notes from the piano were even more beautiful than she remembered from that night in the lobby. But now there was something new in his playing. Hope. As the music filled the concert hall, Rebecca looked around at the audience. These weren't the wealthy socialites from the charity gala. This was a mixed crowd: music students, working families, elderly couples who had loved classical music their whole lives, young people who had seen the viral video and wanted to hear David play in person. She could see people in the audience crying. David's playing had that effect on people. He didn't just play the notes. He told a story with every phrase. Tonight the story was about love and loss, about falling down and getting back up, about finding beauty even in the darkest times. During the slow, romantic second movement, Rebecca found herself thinking about everything that had led to this moment. If someone had told her a year ago that she would fall in love with a janitor who turned out to be a world-class musician, she would have laughed. But life had a way of surprising you when you least expected it. The business world had eventually accepted their relationship, mostly because Rebecca's company had continued to thrive. It turned out that having a CEO who was genuinely happy and fulfilled made her even better at her job. Some of her biggest competitors had tried to poach her best employees by suggesting she had lost focus, but her team had stayed loyal. They could see that Rebecca was the same brilliant leader she had always been, just happier. David had quit his janitor job after the concert announcement, but not because Rebecca asked him to. He quit because he realized he was ready to be a musician again. He had started teaching piano lessons to children, and Rebecca had never seen him more content than when he was working with young students who reminded him of his daughter, Elena. As the concerto moved into its powerful final movement, Rebecca felt her heart racing with pride and love. This was David at his absolute best, pouring everything he had into the music. The orchestra was playing beautifully, but David was the star. Every note he played seemed to sparkle with life and energy. The audience was completely captivated. Rebecca could see people leaning forward in their seats, hanging on every note. This was what live music was supposed to be, a connection between the performer and the audience, a shared experience that touched everyone's soul. When David reached the final, thunderous chords of the concerto, the entire concert hall erupted in applause. People jumped to their feet, cheering and clapping with an enthusiasm that showed they knew they had witnessed something special. David stood at the piano, his face glowing with joy and satisfaction, and took a bow. The applause went on for almost 5 minutes. David had to bow 3 times before it finally started to quiet down. As he walked off stage, Rebecca saw him wipe tears from his eyes. She knew they were happy tears, tears of gratitude for being able to share his gift with the world again. After the concert, there was a small reception in the lobby. Rebecca watched David talk to audience members, sign programs, and accept congratulations, with grace and humility. Several music critics were there, and she overheard one of them saying it was the best performance of that concerto he had heard in 20 years. "Rebecca," David appeared beside her, still glowing from the performance. "Did you hear what the conductor said? He wants me to perform with them again next season." Rebecca smiled and took his hand. "That's wonderful. But how do you feel?" David was quiet for a moment, considering the question. "I feel like myself again," he said finally. "Not the person I was before the accident. That person is gone. But the person I am now, with all my experiences, all my pain and healing. I feel whole." "Good," Rebecca said, "because I have something to ask you." David raised an eyebrow, curious. Rebecca reached into her purse and pulled out a small velvet box. David's eyes widened in surprise as she got down on one knee right there, in the middle of the reception. "David," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the lobby, "6 months ago, I made a promise that if someone could play that concerto perfectly, I would marry them. Tonight, you didn't just play it perfectly, you played it like it had never been played before." The people around them had stopped their conversations and were watching with amazement and delight. "But more than that," Rebecca continued, "you've shown me what it means to love someone for who they really are. You've taught me that the most valuable things in life can't be bought or sold. You've made me a better person, and you've made me happier than I ever thought possible." She opened the box, revealing a simple, elegant ring. "Will you marry me?" David stared at her for a moment, then started laughing, not because it was funny, but because it was so perfectly right. Here they were, back where it all started, with a piano nearby and an audience watching, and she was keeping her promise in the most beautiful way possible. "Yes," he said, reaching down to help her stand up. "Yes, absolutely yes." The crowd in the lobby burst into applause again, even louder than they had applauded the concert. As Rebecca slipped the ring onto David's finger, she realized that this was what a real fairy tale looked like. Not perfect people living perfect lives, but real people with real problems choosing to build something beautiful together. Later, that night, as they sat in David's apartment with the piano Rebecca had bought him, she asked him to play something for her. "What would you like to hear?" he asked. "Anything," Rebecca said. "Just play whatever makes you happy." David thought for a moment, then began to play a gentle, simple melody. It wasn't complicated or showy like the concerto. It was just beautiful, the kind of music that made you feel peaceful and content and grateful to be alive. "What is that?" Rebecca asked. "It's a lullaby I used to play for Elena when she couldn't sleep," David said softly. "I hadn't been able to play it since the accident, but tonight it doesn't make me sad anymore. It makes me remember how lucky I was to have that time with her." Rebecca moved to sit beside him on the piano bench. "Do you think Maria and Elena would have liked me?" David smiled and kept playing. "Elena would have loved you. She was always fascinated by strong, smart women. And Maria..." He paused, thinking. "Maria would have been happy that I found someone who understands that music isn't just something you do. It's something you are. As David continued to play, Rebecca realized that their story was just beginning. They had work to do, dreams to chase, challenges to face, but they would do it together. And that made all the difference. Sometimes the most beautiful music comes from the most unexpected places. And sometimes the most beautiful love stories start with a simple challenge and a willingness to be surprised by what you find.